we are going to have a live stream of this event, and you can share the link if someone has not been able to join. We will be working until 5:30 p.m. We have a busy agenda ahead of us. So once again, greetings to all the participants, representatives of the regional authorities, representatives of civil society, as well as international organizations that have joined. And I suggest that we start with welcome remarks, and I would like to give the floor to Ms. Katarina Levchenko, Government Commissioner for Gender Policy. I can see that she's here, so Katarina, the floor is yours. Thank you, Maria. On my screen, we are side by side. I know that icons look different on different screens. I want to wish all of us good spirits and fruitful discussion. I'm very grateful for this initiative to the Kyiv Institute of Gender Studies. Thank you for the initiative to conduct a national meeting on gender measurement entitled Capacity of the National System for Monitoring Women's Rights and Gender Equality. Undoubtedly, this event is of paramount importance because it is aimed at helping us craft a national system for ensuring gender equality between men and women in Ukraine. And it's crucial if we want to track down the effectiveness of our national gender policy. The gender policy is on top of the government agenda, and you know that the principle behind the gender policy implementation is based on eliminating all forms of discrimination. And we also want to ensure the protection of women's rights and gender mainstreaming and integration into all our policy areas. This principle is incorporated into the resolution of the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine adopted last year. This principle is also encapsulated by a number of regulations and documents adopted by the government of Ukraine. And this principle has been translated into reality through some practical steps. We have some legislative documents that are aimed at ensuring gender equality between men and women. And these documents pertain to various areas of life, safety and security, information, communications. We have an approved strategy of communications on gender issues, economic affairs, labor rights of men and women. And right now we are in the process of elaborating the draft national strategy for mitigating gender inequality in labor relations. We also want to reduce barriers. We have a national strategy of barrier-free spaces, and this strategy incorporates a gender dimension. I can continue with this list of examples. The government is determined to ensure equal rights and possibilities in all areas of life and activity. But at the same time, we do understand that apart from the implementation of all the adopted documents and regulations, it's essential to evaluate the effectiveness of the state policy, to conduct perpetual monitoring of the state policy implementation. And to this end, we require a set of indicators that will help us know that there is a positive progress in place. Last year, the State Statistics Office of Ukraine elaborated a draft governmental document entitled the Regulation on Monitoring Gender Equality. This document was approved by the government in December last year. So now we have 226 indicators that are collected and based on gender. And these indicators will definitely facilitate data collection to ensure and track down the protection of women's rights and ensuring gender equality. Are these indicators sufficient? Are there any challenges and obstacles on the way? These are pertinent questions that we will attempt to answer during this meeting and in the near future. We also have a draft national strategy for ensuring gender equality between men and women, based on the initiative of Ms. Olga Stefanishina, the Vice Prime Minister for European Integration. We are grateful to the Ministry of Social Policy that has contributed significantly. I would like to use this opportunity and extend my sincere gratitude to the UN Women for their support with conducting 5 planning sessions that were conducted in a professional manner in June this year. And during these meetings, we brought together representatives of the governmental agencies, NGOs, civil society organizations, expert communities. And tomorrow at 9:30 a.m., we're going to have a public hearing of this document. I am extremely pleased about this achievement, and I would like to congratulate everyone and commend everyone on the elaboration of this document. So at 9:30 a.m. tomorrow, we will have a public hearing. The document itself is published on the website of the Ministry of Social Policy, and as per the established procedure, the Ministry of Social Policy is in the process of collecting feedback on this document with the use of a standard template. So this is the document in question. We are preparing for the public hearing tomorrow morning. I will attend as well. And we are looking forward to receiving specific feedback and proposals on this document. But this document is not really the centerpiece of our discussion today. We want to be able to measure the progress in the implementation of this strategy. And for this purpose, we need indicators. This strategy is for 10 years, 2030, and it's closely linked to SDGs and those indicators that are incorporated into the national reports on SDG development. So every 3 years, we will also craft action plans to implement this national strategy, and these action plans have to encapsulate indicators as well. Indicators are of importance for sectoral documents and strategies, for local plans that are devised at the level of individual territorial communities or hromadas. The meeting today is the reflection of our need for such indicators. As the government commissioner for gender policy, I can state with certainty that I do need such a set or framework of indicators, so that we will be able to understand the state of play and we need two proposals. We are going to draft a resolution of this national meeting on gender measurement. But please make your proposals and recommendations clear and targeted, because we want to have certainty about who should be responsible for doing what. I really hope that we will have an animated and professional discussion on the issue of gender measurement and ensuring women's protection and gender equality. Thank you very much, Ms. Levchenko. I fully agree with you about being specific in your proposals and recommendations. One short aspect. Should you have any comments or inputs to our resolution, send them to Ms. Victoria Tkachuk via the chat. She will collect all the feedback, and we will have a separate Q&A block, and all your ideas, proposals to the resolution will be taken into account as part of our work. And now I want to give the floor to Ms. Valentina Zuzula, Director of the Department for Protection of Children's Rights and Ensuring Equality Standards of the National Social Service of Ukraine. Ms. Zuzula, the floor is yours. I'm really sorry for interrupting, but as per the agenda, the next speaker is our donor, Ms. Priska Depnering. Maria, I have a big request. Can I have a link to the broadcast of this event? Maybe you can post it in the chat. We will do it in a minute, no problem. And now I want to give the floor to Ms. Priska Depnering, Deputy Director of the Swiss Cooperation Office in Ukraine, for welcome remarks. If you require interpretation, please have a look at the bottom of the Zoom screen. There's an interpretation function there. Choose the Ukrainian channel because we have simultaneous interpretation. Ms. Depnering, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And yes, I will speak in English, and I hope the translation works. Dear participants, dear colleagues, it's really my pleasure to participate this afternoon and to welcome you here at the National Meeting on Gender Measurement. In 2019, the Embassy of Switzerland has decided to support the project Women's Rights Monitoring Initiative submitted by the Kyiv Institute on Gender Studies, as we believe that it's important to ensure effective measurement of gender equality and in particular of women's rights. We know that it is one thing to talk about inequality and about how we estimate and how we feel it, but it's another thing to have clear indicators which allow for a measurement and which allow for an evidence-based discussion which can lead our decisions. The gender measuring tool, which has been developed in the frame of this project, intends to contribute to more justice and equity in the society, because exactly it allows to measure what is the situation related to equality and to inequality. Switzerland has supported the development of these tools and of these indicators because we're convinced that it's very important to contribute to the discussion. And it's also very important not just to develop these tools and indicators, but also to test them, to discuss them with a broad public, to get feedback, and if necessary, to adapt the indicators which have been developed. And I think today's afternoon is an excellent platform to do this exercise and to test what has been developed. And we're convinced that it's these indicators and these tools which will also allow, mentioned before by Ms. Levchenko, it's also these indicators which can help to have a good exchange. We see that in Ukraine, very much on this topic is going on, and we're very happy to see that many of these indicators on women equality and gender equality have been taken up in important documents. We heard before about these 226 indicators for monitoring gender equality, which were mentioned by Ms. Levchenko. But we also see that, for instance, in the frame of the decentralization reform, indicators on gender equality are applied at the local level. And also in the frame of the Sustainable Development Goals to the national, in the national system, the National State Statistics Committee of Ukraine has clear indicators to measure the development related to achieving the goals. So all these are good signs that increasingly Ukraine is putting a lot of efforts in measuring what is going on, and based on the results to have a discussion to improve legislations and strategies. We know that the project and the implementation of the project was not always easy, that there were some challenging circumstances to work on these tools and the indicators, but we're very happy to see that it has progressed well, that the Kyiv Institute on Gender Studies really came up with a very good proposal. And we're very happy to see that this can be presented and that a broader public can be engaged. And we think that it's very important now to do the next step, which is making this tool operational. And we wish the team which is behind this project, but also all participants of this workshop or meeting this afternoon, very good discussions, and then a lot of success in implementing the tool and in guiding our discussions and decisions further on based on indicators and measurement. Thank you very much.
Priska, thank you very much for your input. Thank you for your recommendations and for supporting this activity in Ukraine. Now that we've heard from Priska, I'd like to give the floor to Valentina Zuzula, who represents the National Social Service of Ukraine. The floor is yours. Good day, dear colleagues. I have the great pleasure of speaking on behalf of Valentina Zuzula as a deputy director for the department and her personal deputy. I am Vovk, and we are in harmony with Valentina because of our names. There are 18 staff in our department, 4 men and 14 charming women led by Valentina. I'm deputy director of the department for the protection of the rights of children and enhancing equality standards. Now is my christening in my position for the equality standards. It's my first opportunity to join this broad circle of NGOs working towards the gender policy, and it's a great honor for me to meet you and welcome you with this wonderful event, which was enabled through cooperation with the Kyiv Institute of Gender Studies. Our service was established last year with the resolution of the Cabinet of Ministers. We celebrated a year anniversary. It's only 6 months that our department has been around. We are still setting up our territorial units, and one of the key objectives is to implement the policy to enhance equal rights and opportunities for men and women. As we've heard from Katerina Levchenko, as we've heard from our international donors, the key objectives is to shape the policy, give a very clear legislative and regulatory framework for its implementation, and then we have to do the most important thing, and that is to monitor the implementation of these documents in real context. And that's where the field of our future cooperation lies. Because as we looked at the reports of the central governmental agencies on the implementation of our national action plans, we've seen the problems such as inconsistency of the information provided with the objectives and the indicators, reporting on the tasks, often undefined by the local authorities, often the target audiences are incorrectly identified, and that affects the achievement of the goals. The effective monitor will define how effectively the policy can be implemented. Another important factor that we have to incorporate is the rapid decentralization of government. If before our key partners were the regional, state administration and municipal executive committees of the local self-governance, now with the start of the transition of the devolvement of the power to the local communities, the homologated commanders will have to implement in gender equality. And the gender experts from the local communities have to receive clear information from us, and that will help shape the policies on the local level. And then the reports they will send to the regional administration and the central governmental authorities. So we feel that this meeting is a very important opportunity to develop the mechanism for gender measuring. Wishing everyone a very productive day. Thank you for the introductions. Thank you for your attention. Mr. Volodymyr, thank you. We heard of the National Social Service Center. Thank you. And I'm giving the floor to Svetlana Tishchinska, who is the coordinator of the Expert Council on Prevention and Counteraction of Gender Discrimination of the Ministry of Social Policy of Ukraine. Ms. Svetlana, you have 3 minutes for the welcoming address. Thank you for the reminder. I'd like to start by welcoming all the participants of the meeting, of this national meeting. I'd like to start by expressing my gratitude for the chance to be involved in such an undertaking, and I hope our cooperation will bear excellent fruit, and together we'll develop and implement the system for monitoring the documents related to women's rights and gender equality. The Ministry of Social Policy, as the special designated governmental agency, develops the policy for gender, but also is responsible for monitoring all the implementation of all the regulations enacted. The department for monitoring the observation of European equality standards has to monitor the fulfillment of the document. But the department is quite recent. It's been around for 3 or 4 months only. We are developing our own monitoring system, but I realize that it can't include the same indicators that we could incorporate by working with the NGOs and international organizations. And I agree with the speakers before me that the most important about implementation of the national policy is a way to measure its effectiveness. So I'm very grateful for the opportunity. I'm hopeful that we will succeed, and this monitoring system will bring good, positive results. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you. Ms. Vilana, thank you very much. You took a minute and a half, and you've said all the most important things. Thank you. And I'm giving the floor to Dr. Marfa Skorek, Director of the Kyiv Institute of Gender Studies, in charge of the project, without whose incessant energy this event would never have happened. So, Ms. Marfa, the floor is yours. Thank you. Thank you for the kind words. I'd like to thank our colleagues from the governmental institutions who've joined this event, who find the good words of encouragement for our cooperation, which has been around for a long time. And finally, we've produced the results that we'd like to share with our NGOs, women's organizations, a statistics committee, representatives of the Ministry of the Regional Development, and other central governmental authorities that implement the equality and non-discrimination policy. Today, this coordination meeting will be quite technical. You'll hear a lot of presentation. You'll be exposed to a lot of information. We can't fit a 2-year project in a brief presentation or a video. Of course, still, we'll try to respond to all the questions we will receive, and we'll try to effectively use the opportunity to meet in such great company. There are over 100 participants joining us now, representing regional women's organizations and others, uh, like the national organizations. I'm certain we'll have an open discussion of the status we have with the gender statistics, and we'll be in a position to shape our expectations and vision of how we can improve the situation, referring to the most important documents mentioned by Katerina Levchenko's, which will be enacted shortly, that will call for the focused and effective implementation. As an institution, as an expert faculty of the Kyiv Institute, we'd like to express our sincere gratitude to the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation, who've been so patient, so supportive, and so understanding throughout the entire journey, which hasn't been an easy one of the implementation of the project. For true support and true encouragement, that we like to thank the agency for, and everyone involved in the project on behalf of the agency. I'm sorry if I've ran over the time limit, but I tried to be brief. Thank you. Thank you, Marfa. You took 3 minutes precisely, so all very neat and brief. Next, I'd like to give the floor to Marina Lehenka, who is the Vice President of La Strada, Ukraine. She will make a presentation of the scientific journal, Man, Society, State, Gender Dimension. Ms. Marina, you have 5 minutes. Ms. Maria, thank you. Hello to all the participants. Can you see the presentation? Not yet. Okay, if you could give me a minute then. We can see it now. Fine. Thank you very much. So thank you for the opportunity. I'd like to thank the organizers for this chance. And I'm very happy to present the publication. Therefore, I'm presenting to you a publication which was started through the initiative and cooperation of the Governmental Commissioner for Gender Policy, Katerina Levchenko, and academics, activists, and this has been enabled by the Ukrainian Women's Fund. Today, we are seeing a livening of interest amongst the academic and the society to the gender issues, but we're seeing a lack of forum to discuss the solutions, some academic solutions, and there is lack of integral approach for the equal opportunities of men and women in different areas of science. So this scientific practical journal, Man, Society, State, a gender dimension, has to become as a platform for an expert communication on gender equality and developing a gender sensitive outlook, both amongst the academia and a broader society. This is the aim of the journal. I'm not going to read it out now, but this journal comes as the logical step of evolution of the gender policy of the state. Obviously, the publication aims to publish the scientific research findings and to add another objective we've set out to pursue, that is to give importance to academic studies to consolidate the women academia in Ukraine. We need to mention the editor-in-chief of the journal. It's Katerina Levchenko, who is the inspirator of the publication. She has given her consent to take up the job of the editor-in-chief, and that is perfectly consistent and reasonable. So here you have the chief editor. You can also see the screen of the electronic version of the publication of the website. After the presentation, I'll send a link to the requirements for publications and the reference to the website. Speaking of the publication, I'd like to say that we plan to make it a multidisciplinary publication as gender dimension cuts across all areas of science, and we plan to cover legal studies, public administration, social studies, psychology, pedagogics. It's going to be available in open access, and we hope this will help provide open access to the people. It will uh, disseminate scientific information and provide opportunities for knowledge sharing, for social progress in this field. And I'd like to underscore that I'm going to send the reference to the link in the chat. I encourage contributions. Please share your findings. Please share your practical and academic insights. I know that sharing your ideas with others is going to make an important step to the evolution of the publication. I would also like to say that the editorial board will work to include the journal in the academic journals list. The first edition is in the making. We plan to publish it sometime soon. As you'll see, we are planning to collect the publications until September 15th. We may extend the deadline a little bit because the academic activity has only kick-started these days in the universities, so we'll extend the deadline a little. So you're welcome to submit your academic publications so that we could make the publications a success, and I hope I made into the time limit.
Thank you, Marina. You did a great job. Thank you for the presentation of this important scientific publication. And I really hope that it will facilitate the institutionalization of such studies and women's rights promotion in Ukraine. The next block of our today's event is a panel discussion entitled as follows: Dear colleagues, someone is not muted. So a reminder for everyone, if you're not speaking, do not forget to mute yourselves. So the title of the next block is National Experience of Gender Measurement, Pros and Cons, Achievements and Gaps. We are going to have a joint presentation from the experts of the project Women's Rights Monitoring Initiative, Ms. Anastasia Salnikova and Ms. Katerina Krasnikova. They will present the project results, reviews performed under the project Women's Rights Monitoring Initiative. Anastasia, Katerina, the floor is yours. You have 20 minutes for your presentation. Good afternoon. Thank you, Maria. Please tell me whether you can see my presentation on the screen. Yes, everything is fine. Thank you. Is it okay if I have my power presentation in this mode, not in a full screen mode? Because honestly, I don't really know how to switch it to a full screen mode. Is it okay if I have my PowerPoint presentation like this? It's all right, no problem. I'm just sharing it from my Google Disk, and I'm not really sure how to switch to a full screen mode. Anyway, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Katerina and I are going to present some of the activities that were performed within the project implemented by the Kyiv Institute of Gender Studies. And based on the project results, we will make a proposal on the indicators that should be used in Ukraine. So basically, within this part of our discussion, we want to elucidate how we analyzed the project activities and results, and we believe that it will be a robust foundation for our further work in Ukraine. All in all, we analyzed 25 various gender indices in Ukraine. Of them, 22 global and 3 regional indices. And of them, 13 indices included those indicators that evaluated the situation in Ukraine, 5 comprehensive indicators and 8 sectoral indicators. We also reviewed a system of indicators. 3 included Ukraine, and we also tried to have a look at the current state of play with data portals. We identified 9 data portals that incorporated, in particular, information on Ukraine. So all in all, we were able to review and analyze upwards of 400 diverse indicators, global, regional, and sectoral ones. These are all the indicators that pertain to gender equality or women's rights to this or that extent. The indicators that we reviewed can be analyzed from a different perspective. The geographic footprint varied. Some of these indicators were global ones, and they encompassed either all countries globally or some countries of the world. For example, the gender gap index. And we also reviewed some regional indicators and indices that encompass a specific region and are of interest to those people that work in a specific region. For example, the European Gender Equality Index. Correspondingly, these indices did not really contain any information on gender measurement in Ukraine, and they are of lesser importance for further work in this regard in Ukraine. There were some thematic variations. We reviewed some comprehensive indicators encapsulated various aspects of gender equality or inequality, for example, the gender gap index. But at the same time, we also analyzed some sectoral indicators that were focused on one or several sectors. An example of such an index is the Women's Power Index. Within our project, we also reviewed and analyzed how the status of gender inequality is measured within different international systems of indicators. And we paid special attention to the indicators within SDGs, Beijing Declaration, and the UN Convention on the Elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. Unlike the indices that I mentioned earlier, international systems of indicators are a little bit different because they are basically compilations of diverse indicators that can be used for the measurement of specific areas, and you can adjust them to specific countries because some of these indicators might be fit for purpose in one country or might not be that appropriate in another country. And you can use these international indicators to adapt them to the local context. And based on these international indicators, you can create your own personalized system of indicators that will work best in your specific country. International systems of indicators are more comprehensive and broader, while the aforementioned indices are more quantitatively based. So my point is that there are some slight differences between the indices and the international systems of indicators, and they all have their pros and cons. What are some global comprehensive indices that we incorporated into our research because we believe that they can be of benefit in our context? You can see 5 of these indices on the screen. We detailed each of the indices, and we also described how these indices are built on specific indicators. Some of these indices are grounded in difficult and complex systems with indicators, sub-indicators. It's a convoluted framework. For time considerations, I will not be able to elucidate everything in great detail, but you can find additional information in the report that will follow our study. So this is a report on the results of our project. On this slide, you can see the global sectoral indices that pertain to Ukraine. You can see gender budgeting index. Ukraine is indexed there, but unfortunately, there's no data on our country yet. How measurements are performed, how these indices are formed, all this information is detailed in our report. So if you are interested, please refer to our report, and you can use the results of the study within your activities. Gender data portals that include information on Ukraine. We identified 9 gender data portals that include data on Ukraine, and there is some valuable information that can be used for research purposes and policy development. But our focus was primarily on trying to understand which indicators are in line with the 14 thematic areas that were identified as the top priority ones as per the UN Convention on the Elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. You can see these thematic areas on the screen. We just tried to understand which indicators were in line with each of the 14 thematic areas. And now briefly on specific project results, we analyzed which indices included information on each of the 14 thematic areas. So here you can see how many global indices include the key topics on Ukraine. So you can see that most global indices pertain to the issue of employment. The least number of indices are related to women's participation in rural life. So basically, you can see whether these indices contain voluminous or little information. And then you can transition to the next section of our report. And there you can see which specific indices or indicators contain information on the issue that you're interested in. For example, if your interest is political and social life, you can see which specific indices contain information on this topic. And then you can refer to these indices and draw information from there directly. In parallel, we also reviewed sectoral indices, and you can see that participation at international level and commitments pertaining to the elimination of discrimination. So these two topics are best reflected, while women and girls in the countryside is the topic that is not reflected in the sectoral indices. We put together a similar table, and here you can see which specific global sectoral indices contain data on your research areas, or maybe you can find some topics that can be used for policy development. So these are the results that we achieved while analyzing global indices, both comprehensive and sectoral ones. And now I want to give the floor to Katarina, and she will provide you with a bigger picture of our results. Thank you, Anastasia. On this screen, you can see a chart that consolidates global, comprehensive, and sectoral gender indices, and we can see which areas and topics that are best or worst reflected. Like we can see that the employment, political and social life are well informed. Participation in international life, economic and social life are a little bit less equipped with data. And you can see that out of 13 reviewed indices, there's only one index that includes information on women and girls in the countryside. That's with regard to comprehensive gender indices. And as for the sectoral indices, there's not a single index that contains information on women and girls in the countryside. Briefly on the conclusions, having reviewed the international experience, now we have a better understanding of which data are reflected in which indices. We can see that employment and political and social life are encapsulated by 9 out of 13 indices. And the topic of education is a little bit behind, 8 out of 13 indices, and the least represented is the topic of women and girls in the countryside, only one index out of 13. There's a lack of data on such topics as temporary special measures, participation at international level, marriage and family life. And it takes us back to why we decided to perform such a review. We would like to see how the nationwide and sectoral gender policy is supported by data in global indices. We have already mentioned before that we have a shortage of domestic data. Therefore, it's important for us to understand where we can glean data from at global level. Ukraine is presented in the gender gap index, but we also wanted to see which materials we can use to compare Ukraine with other countries. So we wanted to have a better understanding of our ranking globally. So the ultimate objective was to broaden the gender framework. We wanted to do a deeper dive into the potential of gender measurement. Within our project, it was essential for us to see which research areas are promising. Like, for example, we can see that the topic of women and girls in the country's side is in dire need of data, which means that there is a lot of room for research along these lines. Thank you, Anastasia. Thank you, Katarina. I would like to remind all the participants that you can write your questions down in the chat, and Ms. Victoria will collect all your inputs, comments, and questions. Also, use the chat to write down your proposals for the resolution of our meeting. Our next and last speaker within this block is Ms. Marta Sporek, the leader of the project Women's Rights Monitoring Initiative. Marta, the floor is yours. You have 10 minutes. Marta, we cannot hear you. Thank you. Can you see my presentation on the screen? Yes, everything is fine. We can see it. Thank you. Thank you, Anastasia. Thank you, Katarina. This review of international systems of measurement where Ukraine is present was the centerpiece of our project, because within this review, we collected copious materials, more than what was presented by my colleagues. And now I would like to provide you with an overview of national practices for monitoring women's rights. My colleagues explored the international experience from the perspective so they try to understand which gender data we have in various sectors. The review of national practices had a different focus, because we concentrated more on the national level and local level. And as for the national level, then we perused some national practices, and you will hear more details within my presentation.
Повний розмір видно, так? Коректно відображається, так? Значить, це ми як коротко.
So, let me first mention that we have reviewed all the attempts to monitor the rights of women. We analyzed them, prepared a separate publication, and we have quite a lot of background material, and we'll deal with the most relevant ones separately. All the measurements that you can see can be broken down into two groups: those done by the government. These are usually gender disaggregated data in the national statistics starting 2009. You will remember gender statistics prepared by the colleagues from the former State Statistics Committee, then the gender portraits of oblasts and cities. This effort was undertaken in 2010 and is still effective. Next, gender profiling of the region, and 226 indicators for the monitors of gender equality of the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine that was already mentioned today. There are many more attempts of the non-governmental gender measurements initiated by donors and local initiatives. There is a local initiative to create a gender map of Ukraine. It's a very interesting set of indicators developed by a network, Women's Consortium, which aimed to combine the national and the local level into one package. This truly turned out to be very helpful experience. My numbering is off. I beg your pardon. This seems to be working better. Next, there were various attempts, like an attempt to build a Ukrainian barometer of non-discrimination for the Parliamentary Commissioner for Human Rights. Mostly, the attempts to develop gender measuring aimed to measure the intervention of the governmental institutions. They were designed to measure a statistically visible discrimination, while the mandate of the parliamentary commissioner was to monitor single human rights violation or rare human rights violations that could indicate some violations which are not yet statistically visible. Next, I need to mention the indicators of the template of gender portrait of a community with You Lead with Europe project. We really like their set of indicators, although we think it should call for some adaptation. We could feel that experienced experts from beyond Ukraine developed the system. With its pros and cons, it's still a very relevant and useful experience. Next are the indicators for the concept of gender passport. Previously, gender passports were developed for the oblast, but now with the decentralization, we're seeing a process of gender measuring at rayon and community level. This initiative was undertaken by the Association of Ukrainian Cities. They are the promoters of the initiative, and we'll hear from them firsthand a bit later on. Next, the indicators for Ukraine for the Chart of Equality of Men and Women, the with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities and the Association of Ukrainian Cities. There are a few others that we'd like to mention. We reviewed all of them. We looked into in the indicators, the way they were structured, the way they are used, their frequency. We performed the analytical review and we really enjoyed it. I hope you'll be interested to see the outcomes. Overall, we'd like to say that Ukraine has a strong background in terms of gender measuring. It's over 15-year long experience, both at the national and regional and local levels. The experience we are lacking sectoral measurements. It's a niche that will be explored actively now when we develop the sectoral gender policy, and the demand is going to rise for the indicators and we have to be prepared. The most common gender profiles were done for the oblast before, and it remains so now. But there was lack of terminology and structural consistency, and these documents were called gender profiles or gender passports, but the approach remained little changed. Looking at the collections of indicators underpinning the portraits of passports or profiles indicates that it's usually the very same product, which is similarly designed using a similar set of indicators. And I'll mention it a bit later. There are limitations to this approach, and that all the measurements relied on the limited data of the State Committee for Statistics of Ukraine. The upside is that it's important to have regularity and consistency for the measurement, and that was provided by the State Committee for Statistics. I can't move the next slide for some reason. Okay, it's working now. I'd like to give you an example. You don't need to look into the fine print, but this is the list of indicators of the gender portrait of Chernivtsi Oblast for 2010. So it was very important for us to look at the structure. And the structure can be seen at the top row of the spreadsheet. I will mention the sectoral policy again. So we have 5 columns: social democracy, economic indicators, social cultural indicators, social political indicators, and others. So this covers 4 areas. Let's not discuss whether the indicators are sufficient or not, but anyways, there are 4 sectors here. The others are not mentioned here. If we like to do a comprehensive monitoring, we need to cover many more sectors and not just those. So gender portrait code for 2 steps. First is the collection of statistic data, about 30 of them. And then we could see the disproportions, the gender gaps, we described them, and we could see where they lay, and that was what the gender portraits were about. Usually all the portraits included 4 main sectors: demography, healthcare, employment, education, and science. Given our human rights background and that we are very involved with the Convention for the Liquidation of All Forms of Discrimination of Women, identifying 12 sectors where the rights of women can be violated, these 4 mean that we are lacking another 8, and we'll be seeking them. That's the question why we are proceeding with developing our own set of instruments, why we decided to start developing our own set of instruments. This slide is there to show you the problem that I haven't defined yet, such as that a lot of information collected by the State Statistics Committee is not fit for reporting. For our purposes, they are divided by gender, but there's little we can draw from them, from the human rights issues. There's little we can put in the report, but they comprise a bulk of data available to us in Ukraine. Overall, when we can just use the data made available by the state statistics, we cannot identify the gender problem. We have to look at the state statistic data for our monitoring efforts. We have to see that we will only identify the problems identified by the Statistics Committee, and it won't identify those that they haven't identified. That is the problem. Please don't take me as an overcritical person. Indeed, gender profiling has been recognized as the most successful and most common practice in the regional gender policy of Ukraine. And this practice has produced indicators that were standardized by the Cabinet of Ministers, and in 2018 the list was regulated for 33 indicators for the extensive gender profiling of all the oblasts of Ukraine. I'm sure you're familiar with the experience. Ms. Maria, please let me know if I run over the time limit. Surely we have so much to share. We are very dedicated to this question. I would just like to show you some profiles As an illustration, a very interesting thing about this effort is that it uses different types of data: statistic data, administrative data, and data on the implementation of gender policy. If we do the monitoring as public monitors and refer to the international documents, they refer to the policy documents, those enacted by the government, gender equality agencies, etc. So, using the three sources of data was a very useful point about the gender profiles, and this was a very good initiative. In my presentation, I decided to focus on the governmental practices, as our colleagues will present their own findings and their own products, and they will do it much better than I could ever do. And these are the last few slides. Indeed, we received the basic list of indicators. It too comprises the data collected by the Statistics Committee and other agencies. So we have two sources of data here. The only thing that concerned us as monitors about the situation of Ukraine was that the goal of the indicators was to collect the data that would be compatible with international indicators. But we have seen that the instruments applicable for measuring in other countries aren't always applicable locally. And the situation on the national level needs to be detailed further. The international instruments are meant to measure many countries. They're very generic, and you can't design a regional policy based on international indicators. You couldn't do it at oblast level or lower down. Now, with the decentralization reform ongoing in Ukraine, we see why we were not over-enthused with the indicators. In here, there's a good thing that these indicators went beyond the 5 or 6 main sectors. The good thing about them was that they are much more comprehensive. We won't be overcritical about the indicators included. Somebody's microphone has been activated. So that's 12 modules and 48 indicators, and a very good foundation for the monitoring system. And these are not the indicators we would have chosen. My colleagues will present our experience of measuring conducted by our colleagues, and we'll go back to these same sectors. It's important to note that they're there and many sectors were covered, so the gender policy is better filled with data now. We can be more optimistic about it. So the effort hasn't been wasted. Now, let me make some preliminary conclusions. Please put your comments in the chat. Please address them to Victoria. We will respond. We'd like to present our finding that the gender monitoring system, the system for monitoring gender equality that is developed now, needs to make a pivot to cater for the internal domestic national needs to develop the equality policy and non-discrimination. And this needs to be implemented at the local, sectoral, and the national levels. We need to come closer to the people. We need to reconsider the policy of protecting the rights of women as something that we need to report somewhere abroad, but we need it for our domestic use. And that's about indicators. And I like to conclude here. Thank you for your patience. We're very open for communications. Please reach out. We'll be very happy to interact and respond.
Thank you, Marfa, for this insightful and instructive presentation. As per the law on statistics, the local authorities can collect required stats. They don't have to wait for any instructions from the capital to meet their needs. They can collect all necessary data themselves. Now we have some time for questions and answers. Victoria passed on one question on where participants can find these presentations, because the participants are interested in all the studies whose results have already been presented. I really hope that the organizers of the event will be able to provide us with the PDF versions of all the PowerPoint presentations. If there are no other questions, then I suggest that we move to the next block entitled The Best Statistics for Better Reporting from the Field, so transitioning from the national level to the local level. The next presentation will be a joint presentation of Mr. Alexander Lashko, project coordinator from the Association of Ukrainian Cities, and Ms. Natalia Lazarenko, international affairs manager of the Association of Ukrainian Cities, as well as gender equality coordinator. They will make a presentation on the automated system of municipal statistics, its history and challenges. Alexander, Natalia, you have 20 minutes for your presentation. The floor is yours. Thank you. Good afternoon, colleagues. Can you hear me? Yes, great. Thank you. So now let's discuss how it works at local level from the perspective of regional statistics. I represent the Association of Ukrainian Cities together with Natalia, and our organization has enormous experience of collecting regional stats. The project was launched in 2009. In 2012, we launched an automated system of municipal statistics. And this system accumulates data that territorial communities collect and maintain to project their activities. And these data include gender indicators. I would like to mention from the get-go that these gender indicators are not numerous. They are based more on the economic dimension of the community life. Just a minute, I will share my screen and project the presentation. Can you see my presentation? Great, thank you. Why is it done? What for? As per the effective legislation of Ukraine, territorial communities and central authorities shall collect open data. They shall collect them, accumulate them, and publish them. The Association of Ukrainian Cities comprises upwards of 1,000 communities, and if each community created their own tool set or database, that would be problematic. Therefore, we came up with a single solution. The list of open data is public and known. It's just a sample. We have a dedicated resolution of the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine that regulates which data should be collected. Here you can see some laws of Ukraine that regulate open data collection at the level of territorial communities. As the Association of Ukrainian Cities, we based our system on the international experience, but not comprehensive indicators, but more sectoral indicators. On the web portal of the European Union, there's a lot of data, and there you can see information on the community composition, gender portrait. There are voluminous data that you can analyze. Based on that, we developed the ACMC, and it includes about 350 indicators. And it's true indeed that the communities themselves decide how to populate their data sets. We don't have the same indicators for all the communities, and it's related to the technical capacities of our territorial communities. It has already been mentioned by the previous speakers that we do have some issues with who collects data, how they do it, and with which frequency they publish these data. The decentralization reform caused a break in the links between the data holders, the data consumers. The State Statistics Office of Ukraine is closer to the national level, not to the level of territorial communities. Therefore, I forecast that in the future, we are going to have some issues. But nonetheless, more and more data are collected at the level of territorial communities. They are the holders of these data. They are the consumers of data. Recently, we had another meeting on ACMC, and there's a discrepancy between the data provided by the State Service of Standardization and the data provided by the elders offices, Starostat. And we believe that the data of the latter are more relevant, which is a testimony to the fact that we need to collect data from the territorial communities. The next issue is how to help territorial communities collect data, how to help them decide which data to collect. These are the issues that we need to communicate to the communities, in particular, the importance of collecting gender data. A big chunk of our automated system is dedicated to the visualization of data. There are people who are capable of and accustomed to working with large data sets, but most consumers feel more comfortable working with charts or some other visual aids. They are more accustomed to the format that you can see on the screen, because this way they can consume visual information fast, and they can also track the trends. We all understand that an upward trend is not always a good sign. So once again, it takes us back to the topic, how data are collected. They are collected in the form of such Excel spreadsheets, and these data must incorporate inter alia gender data. Our automated system of municipal statistics does not really contain that many gender data, unfortunately. Why? Because we have very few territorial communities that are capable of collecting gender indicators and submitting them into our system. Earlier, during the meeting, it was already mentioned that some indicators cannot be really used for analytical purposes or human rights protection purposes. The gender indicators within our system are quite comparable, and we can cross-reference them with other indicators. For example, how gender indicators impact the life of a community in general. So how does a community change and evolve depending on the gender balance? So as you can see, there's a lot of work ahead of us. Out of the three classical sources of data, we utilize just one source, mostly administrative data. Our ultimate objective is to have a server-to-server exchange of data. We really hope that considering the pace of digitization and digital transformation in Ukraine, sooner or later, we will use nationwide statistics as the main source of information. And it's also valuable to collect data based on sample-based surveys and studies. So you take a sample of indicators or data, and then you try to understand whether this set of data should be further incorporated into the automated system of municipal statistics. That's it briefly on how we collect statistics from the territorial communities. Let me reiterate that the Association of Ukrainian Cities is ready to become a platform where we can have a substantial discussion on which data are necessary at community level. We have considerable experience under our belt in terms of conducting expert meetings and discussions. At this, I want to give the floor to Natalia. She will elucidate some other issues. Should you have any questions, I will be more than happy to answer them. Thank you, Alexander. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I really hope that you can see me and hear me. It's true indeed that for over 20 years, the Association of Ukrainian Cities has been the only source of municipal data. And in the past, we collected everything on paper. So we would have piles and piles of paper and documents containing data from diverse territorial communities. And it would take us months to collect such data. And it created a lot of strain on the staff of the Association of Ukrainian Cities. The automated system of municipal statistics has been in place for upwards of 10 years, but still the area of gender equality is not properly reflected in our automated system. As noted by Alexander, we still conduct certain surveys and studies manually. It's great that we have Google Forms. It definitely facilitates our work. Last year, we decided to conduct our own survey or measurement of how gender policy is implemented at local level. At various events, different figures were articulated, and most projects focus on their specific focus area. So last year, we decided to conduct a review of our work because basically the Association of Ukrainian Cities started working on gender issues in 2010, thanks to our cooperation with the Canadian Association of Municipalities. So we invented our own system of indicators to measure how gender policy is implemented at local level. We carried out a survey among our members, 839 representatives of the territorial communities participated in the survey, city, town, settlement, and village mayors. We presented the findings of the survey last year. Ms. Katerina Levchenko attended. This list of indicators contains data on the participation of men and women in the community administration. For example, men and women in the capacity of mayors, deputy mayors, local councillors. We also explored who was responsible for the implementation of gender responsive budgeting, whether there are responsible persons for gender policy at local level, whether there was gender balance in the local councils, whether women's councils were established at local level. All this information is published on our website dedicated to gender issues. I will post the link to this website in the chat. I would like to encourage you to visit it. There you will find information on the library, on the EU Charter on Gender Equality. On this website, you will also find a system of indicators that are used to measure the implementation of the European Charter. We also did our utmost to collect data on the implementation of gender equality policy, and we published the achievements and accomplishments of some other projects implemented in Ukraine. So visit the website. Should you have any comments or inputs, please let us know. As mentioned by Alexander, we conduct our own surveys and studies. I have already mentioned the last year's survey on the implementation of gender policy at local level. This year, we will have another survey. We also carried out a survey on the best practices among local self-government bodies. And based on this survey, we put together a compilation of the best practices that you can find on the already mentioned website. In fact, we have always supported and will continue supporting the measurement of gender indicators and gender equality. We are also supportive of the gender responsive budgeting. We designed some online courses on this topic. More and more often during events, we hear from the territorial communities that recently it's been very challenging for them to collect gender segregated data. In particular, the data that can be used for the elaboration of gender profiles and gender passports, or the data that can be used for gender responsive budgeting in general. There are communities that have been utilizing the gender responsive budgeting tool for a long time. They already have some good practices under their belt, but we hear from them that it's getting more and more challenging because it's difficult for them to receive information from the tax administration on the number of male and female entrepreneurs, because that data line is not in the reporting of the tax administration. We will continue looking into the problems and challenges of the territorial communities. We will definitely share our findings. We all are in the same boat, and we all are interested in the a quick and streamlined collection of gender data. It should be easy to use a gender responsive budgeting tool. If this tool is easy, then the communities will be motivated to leverage it. Because of course, there are champions among the territorial communities. They are up to speed on the benefits of the gender data and gender responsive budgeting tool. But the more complicated the process, the less desire to work in this area. As mentioned, this year, we will conduct a survey on the implementation of the state national program on gender equality between men and women. And we will also explore the implementation of the CEDAW committee on women's rights and gender equality. By the end of the year, we will present the findings of this study. It encapsulates some other indicators that will help us measure the overall level of gender policy implementation at local level. We are open to cooperation. We are willing to incorporate some additional data and indicators into our automated system of municipal statistics. I know that the UN Women Project is working on a typical gender passport or profile. We are looking forward to getting it because we've been working on our own gender profile. So hopefully by uniting our forces, we will end up with having a unified list of data that communities should collect to make some decisions. And as Alexander explained in his presentation, that the problem is how to use big data. Not only is it a domestic issue, but a global one as well. What does it mean if the indicator was this yesterday, but today it's already different? And which decisions should be made based on big data analysis? And the Association of Ukrainian Cities believes that the Ministry of Digital Transformation must be engaged in this process. We are channeling our efforts towards digital technologies, and we need to make sure that we have men and women columns in any reporting and in any spreadsheets and tables. That will definitely facilitate our work, and then we will have a better understanding of men's and women's participation. So we just need to have these two columns in any reports and templates. That's it on my part. I will publish the link to the website in the chat. Should you have any interesting insights, information on grants, project proposals, submit all the information to us, and we will definitely publish it on the website.
Thank you, Natalia. Thank you, Alexander. We have one more presentation in this blog, which is just as important. We'll hear from Olena Strelnik, who is the gender expert for the Bureau of Gender Strategy and Budgeting, and she's going to talk about the gender-sensitive data for decision-making as a basis for decision-making, challenges of data collection at the level of territorial communities, based on piloting a typical gender profile. And I'm giving the floor and giving a time limit of 10 minutes. Dear participants, thank you for the invitation. I feel that this is a very noteworthy event as we're seeing a lot of progress made, but the efforts need to be streamlined and consolidated. On behalf of the project I represent, I'd like to make my contribution to the discussion of this complex and important question. I represent the Bureau for Gender Strategies and Budgeting and the project for the UN Women for promoting gender equality within the decentralization reform in Ukraine. It's implemented in 13 territorial communities in the 4 oblasts of Ukraine, and I represent our preliminary outputs. As in October this year, we'll be in a position to talk more about the methodology we're using. I'll start by describing what's a gender profile for the community. We decided to define it just as that. So it's a certain informational and analytical document. It's not yet a statistical document at community level. which allows us to collect the data on the discrepancy of the situation of women and men. That has to be then incorporated into the decision making. The data is disaggregated by gender, other elements, and also proposals and recommendations. We are now piloting the project, and I'd like to give you the sample structure of the gender profile of the community as we are seeing it, as we are developing. So this document has to have the introduction with the goal and purpose of the document, and then the community passport. That's the general background of the population and infrastructure of the community, just giving us a chance to know what's there, what assets are there, what infrastructure is there or not, and whether they can lead to certain gaps. Then gender aspects of economic development and gender gaps for service delivery in a variety of sectors like education, healthcare, etc., and institutional and resource support for the gender equality goals, and public sector and decision making. The set of indicators and data collection framework was developed by UN Women. We started it before the Cabinet of Ministers resolution on monitoring gender equality came into effect, but we managed to complement our set of indicators to make it consistent with the Cabinet of Ministers resolution. We incorporated all the other documents too, and now we're using Excel spreadsheets to collect data. Given the subject of this event, I'd like to give you a few examples of the indicators we collect in two areas. That's gender equality goals in decision making, and I'll give an example of gender gap in service delivery. So the set of indicators to assure gender equality goals is quite typical and predictable. We collect information about the staff potential, whether the person and whether there is the relevant department, is there presentation at the council level? Are there any documents underpinning gender policy in the community, like the gender equality program, etc.? Whether there are NGOs for women in the community, if there are any ongoing gender policy, what's the funding for the gender policy in the community? As for the gender gaps in service delivery, I'll give you just an example, and that will be sport. Since the standardized reporting forms do have some indicators disaggregated by gender, and this is known, but the decisions maker are often unaware or don't have access to the information. In particular, you can see a selective list of indicators of sport services. Please note that a lot of the indicators, the first 7 of them, are incorporated in the standardized report on sport and physical culture of the ministry, which the community has to collect and pass to the oblast departments. And there's a lot of disaggregation by gender, like the number of people doing sport by gender, the number of the students of the sports schools, but other indicators are not there in the reporting form, like the gender gap in the pay. We do request the data, but they will refer to the accounting reports for that. What's our logic for the description and analysis of data? For us, it's not just a list of data visualized, but also the analysis and description of the data. So we try to describe gender profile by service delivery sector, we analyze the national and oblast strategic priorities for gender equality. There are some industries where with a lot of regulations, like education, which is very thoroughly regulated, and it's very easy for us to see the national priorities there. Whilst in others, it's more difficult to find them. Let's say the delivery of administrative services isn't so well developed for national priorities. Then we formulate what's available in the community at the outset, whether they have some data or some gender points in their strategies. Then we look at the national gender gaps in this sector, and that gives us a framework. We say that there is a gender gap, pay gap at the national level at this rate, and these are the key reasons for it. And we give it the concept like the vertical or horizontal segregation of the labor market for the communities to have an understanding of what accounts for it. Then we describe the gender gaps in all the sectors based on the infrastructure of the services, gender gaps among service providers, and that is quite rare, gender gaps amongst recipients of the services, and quality data received from the focus groups and interviews. That's another initiative we came forward with is to give some quality data, qualitative data. So what's special about our approach to generalize what I've said before? We liaise the local policies with the national wise. We start by looking at the national priorities for a particular sector. Secondly, we bridge qualitative and quantitative data. We try holding short interviews with the community representatives. We pinpoint sources of data. We look at the reporting the community already provides. Then we describe and analyze the data, and that is very important. For the profile, we provide recommendations for each sector, and we distinguish mandatory and additional indicators. Communities have different capacities, and if there is a project in the community, it could help them do more, but if not, they could do a minimal set of indicators disaggregated by gender and age. I'd like to now focus on challenges my colleagues have done before me, and I will just add a few. The capacity of the communities, like the lack of human, time resources, and technical competencies. Many of the communities need to provide that. Lack of clear regulations on the calculation of indicators. It's easy for the communities to do some indicators. They can give you the number of doctors and nurses, but it's harder for them to say how many doctors per capita, per thousand residents. That could be a bit more confusing for the communities. If you look at the reporting for culture, education, and sports, they have very clear algorithms saying which rows you add, what you deduct to arrive at the indicator or percentage. So that effort is needed. Often the communities don't know why the data is collected, and they can under-evaluate the indicators or over-evaluate the indicators. Like a community reported that they cover 100% kids with kindergartens, which is unrealistic. A lot of the communities are newly established, and we don't have statistics for the newly established communities. And another problem is that we have to be very realistic about the list of indicators and disaggregation, and considering the capacity of the community to collect and analyze them. If the situation is not a subject of our intervention, we have no influence over it, why then collect the data? It could be interesting statistically, but it may not be very relevant for decision making. Now, I'd like to recap and say that we are planning in October this year to hold a separate methodological seminar about the challenges we faced, and we also plan to prepare a manual on implementing the gender approach at community level with a section on data collection and their analysis. Thank you very much for your attention. I'll be very happy to respond to your comments or questions. Thank you, Elena. Now, we have a little time for questions. I will read out the two questions we have already received, and I will ask the presenters to volunteer to answer them. So the first question is addressed by Olena Bobashko, who leads We Are Equal NGO, and she says we involved in gender audits for accessibility for people with low mobility. What do you feel about such monitoring? And second question, the experience of implementing gender equality was successful to varying degree different countries. Should Ukraine learn from these experiences? I'd like to take the first question, if I may. As Larissa Baida and myself in our target communities will be helping to conduct the gender audit for the assembly. We have the data on the share of the medical facilities or sport facilities accessible for people with low mobility. But we have faced that the indicator is perhaps not very accurate. It's very difficult to evaluate accessibility. You need to do technical expertise, and the communities are not in a position to assess this accessibility indicator. So you have to be very wary and not to fall for the temptation that this could be easily available at the community level. Thank you. I'd like to follow up. It is a major issue as people with low mobility
Пані Марфо, ви попадаєте. Тільки що бачу повідомлення, що нестабільний інтернет у нас тут знову.
I'm sorry, we are having internet issues again. Can you hear me? So people with low mobility, as we have also seen, are often people who are elderly, who have to carry heavy bags with their footsteps. These are mothers or parents with young children and many others. We have also considered this issue, and the instrument we developed was when we incorporated mobility through additional instruments. And we formulated questions like, is the public transportation stop
Не по ґрунтовій дорозі, по асфальтованій
50 meters away from the institution along a paved road? And for the rural area, the question would be, is a public transportation stop within 3 kilometers for you? But that was for educational institutions and healthcare institutions. That was the instrument to measure the availability of transportation. But there could be others for the stores, food stores, or the administrative service centers. And as for the experience, as for the international experiences, we appreciate it. We really like the European Gender Equality Index. It's very effective. It's very applicable here. And the instruments are very easy to apply for bigger communities. So while European countries are usually smaller, and this index is applicable to smaller communities and doesn't call for clumsy statistical stress as we have over 40 million people. Unfortunately, we couldn't apply it given the social and political context. We had to go back to the convention, to the CEDAW. That's all for me, and I won't take any more time. Thank you, Marfo. Thank you, Elena. We have another question about the best practices that we should be learning from. I answered the question by saying the European practices are most applicable. There's a Serbian experience which voluntarily introduced the index before they joined the EU. They only did it for the national measuring purposes, but they're a small country and they had the political will and they had the right geopolitical context. And it's a perfect match. It would be a perfect match for us too. And I'm a big advocate of it. And I sadly realized that we can't apply it here and now. That's my opinion. Perhaps others have their opinions. Thank you, Marfo. We'll have to have a better Then, with your permission, we'll proceed to the last but one session for today. This session is to do with what do gender analysts offer as a monitoring tool. Within this session, we will also have a dual presentation and one single presentation. And I'd like to give the floor to Ms. Katerina Krasnikova, the expert of the project Women's Rights Monitoring Initiative, and Marfa Skorek. So stay by, who is the team leader of the project Women's Rights Monitoring Initiative. And within the presentation, they're going to introduce us to the system of indicators of CEDAW for public monitoring of women's rights and additional tools. You have 20 minutes for both of you. You're welcome.
Доброго дня ще раз. Зараз
Good
шеримо екран.
afternoon once again. Just a minute, I will share my screen. Let me know if you can see my presentation or when you see it. We can already see it on the screen. Everything is fine.
Так, зараз ми представимо вам наш інструмент, який ми розробили.
We will expose you to a tool that we developed, and we would like to start with the key notions that we used as a basis: definition of an indicator and definition of a gender indicator. So you can see that an indicator or a gender indicator is a tool for monitoring gender differences and changes to measure the progress in resolving gender inequality. We also opted for a specific Ukrainian equivalent for the word indicator, because we can have some metrics that are separated from the process. What are some other definitions that we leveraged? Indicator and gender segregated indicators, and the difference from gender stats. The gender statistics are broader and should contain the following characteristics: data collection of gender data. Data should reflect gender problems. Data encompass all aspects of life of women and men. And data collection methods factor in stereotypes and biases that can have an impact on the quality of data. But if data are segregated by gender, it's different. Why should we use gender indicators? Because we can use such indicators for advocacy, for presentations. We can also use these indicators to mainstream certain practices. We can use them to measure the main needs and measures. And as for penalties, we can tap into the implementation of the Convention on the Elimination of all Forms of Discrimination against Women, how it's implemented, and we can set penalties or reward for action and lack thereof. And through the collection of gender indicators, we can encourage towards changes, and we can also craft new solutions. As for the possible framework for gender monitoring, you will hear more from Marfa.
Важливо було розділити гендерні показники і просто розділені за
It was
статтю дані.
important for us to differentiate between gender indicators and gender segregated data because there is some ambiguity there. We often try to collect statistical data, and then we try to segregate these data by gender to glean some important information for gender policy, but we decided to apply a different approach. We wanted to understand which areas of gender policy require statistical data. Therefore, it was essential for us to pick a specific framework for gender monitoring. Right now, there are a lot of proposals on the formats for gender monitoring. For example, our colleagues from the Association of Ukrainian Cities demonstrated a beautiful automated system of municipal statistics that can be used for gender data collection. But usually for the purposes of gender monitoring, the following tools are used in Ukraine: SDGs, Beijing Declaration, European Social Charter, European Charter on Women's and Men's Equality, and some other documents. What are the cons of this system? These systems are related predominantly with some external reporting of Ukraine. And all these systems do not have an element of national localization. And this is something that we attempted within our endeavor. The next slide, please. What was the advantage? When we were working on a report on the implementation by Ukraine of the Beijing Declaration and the CEDAW action plan, we conducted an in-depth analysis. So we have three key documents: SDGs, critical areas of concern, and then the Beijing Declaration and the CEDAW action plan. All these documents are intertwined. We were able to select one of these three tools and at the same time include the remaining two. So that was the basis for our work. The next slide, please. We decided to pick the Convention on the Elimination of all Forms of Discrimination against Women as a monitoring framework. Why did we pick this convention? For monitoring purposes, not only do we need to have a system of adequate indicators that will reflect the current reality, but it's also important to ensure the regularity of data collection, because all the indicators collected by the State Statistics Office are collected on a regular basis. But if we want to conduct a broader monitoring, not only based on the data from the State Statistics Office, we need to ensure the regular nature of monitoring. As per CEDAW, we have to report every 4 years, whether we want it or not, within 12 key areas. So this is the framework that is already used. Besides, CEDAW is a system of generic or comprehensive indicators. It has some pros and cons, because not all indicators are reflective of the real situation in Ukraine. And another important aspect is that there's no conflict between the aforementioned 3 documents. Next slide, please.
Ми хотіли також подумати про те, що Україна, ми знаємо, що зараз справді
We know that Ukraine is working a lot on gender policy at national level and regional level. Therefore, there will be more and more gender monitoring tasks and objectives. And in this context, it's important to align and harmonize various gender monitoring systems. This is something that the government of Ukraine is already doing. The next slide, please. I want to reiterate that it's crucial to ensure these 3 elements. We don't want to introduce new monitoring indicators, so it's better to build on the already existing monitoring experience. We should also ground our work in the existing and stable bodies. They are capable of conducting gender monitoring. It's extremely challenging to establish such bodies from ground zero. And the third important element is that we should be ready to compensate the shortage of statistical data on gender policy by other data, and we need to allocate sufficient resources to this end. So these are the 3 aspects, or rather challenges, that we might face during gender monitoring. Regular nature, interaction between various bodies and resources, accessibility, applicability. Even if we have the best system of indicators ever, it will not be beneficial if it's not applicable and actionable. And relevance of indicators. So all these indicators must reflect the current state of play in Ukraine. This is the key component. I want to give the floor to Katerina Krasnikova, and she will tell us more on how we selected the indicators. On this slide, you can see some information on our analysis and how we selected some sectoral indicators based on Article 6, human trafficking and exploitation of prostitution. We put together these large spreadsheets, and we highlighted in yellow those indicators that might be of interest and benefit for the Ukrainian context. The next slide, please. Some stats on what has been done. We analyzed upwards of 400 global, regional, and sectoral indicators and comprehensive indices on gender equality and human and women's rights. We also conducted a review of the best global practices and a review of local practices in the area of women's rights monitoring. And we also designed a system of 120 indicators of independent public gender monitoring of women's rights that is compliant with the local context in Ukraine. So what was the basis for our system of indicators? We used the indicators of the Beijing action platform developed by the European Gender Equality Institute. We just adjusted it to the Ukrainian context. I have already mentioned that we started with 120 indicators, but we complemented them, and currently we have a system of 162 indicators that reflect 14 key areas of women's rights evaluation, and it's in line with the UN Convention on the Elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. Here you can see the selection of these indicators, and you can also see the key areas of action. We called our tool set monitoring maps, and you can use these monitoring maps to conduct monitoring. A monitoring card includes selected indicators. We also incorporated data on the analytical accessibility of this or that indicator, whether there is a need to collect data. As for the format of indicators, we prepared textual format and a digital format. And we also proposed some additional tools that we believe should be implemented for monitoring. Here you can see an example of this monitoring card for Article 1. There are some indicators that are segregated. On this slide, you can see an example from Article 1, definition of discrimination against women and girls, 7 indicators. So you can see the second column, yes or no. If no, we a request to indicate what exactly. You have just a couple of minutes left, by the way. Here you can see some additional tools that we propose for Article 1. For example, CEDAW legislative compliance indicators and CEDAW-based legal reviews. If there's a need for diving deeper into the system, if we want to track down some progress for monitoring purposes, you can use some additional tools. So basically, the number of indicators can increase. Here you can see the translation of the CEDAW legislative compliance indicators. These are indicators developed for various CEDAW articles, and these are legislative compliance indicators, so you can find everything in this guidance. Here you can see an example of Article 2 and additional tools for Article 2. We also loved the tool of the European network of equality bodies, because their tool is comprised of 2 parts. The monitoring of mandate bodies and mandate indicators, and also standards for equality bodies. So it's a very straightforward and simple tool, but we believe that it will be of interest in the Ukrainian context. Back to Marfa. As a result of all the work done, including as part of preparing a report on the implementation of the Beijing action platform and the CEDAW action plan in 2017, we believe that our proposed indicators will be sufficient to monitor all key 12 areas. And the proposed additional tools will allow us to collect indicators for sectoral policies. If there is no need for nationwide monitoring, you can use these local sectoral indicators. So maybe there's a specific local topic that you are working on, and you can use these local indicators to measure and track down progress. This framework might seem convoluted and complex, but we tested it, by the way, back in 2020 with the support of some interns from the Shevchenko University in Kyiv. And the testing demonstrated that the system is actionable. We intend to apply the system at least once to have even more certainty that it will work. We are not really sure whether the system will be fit for purpose at local level. It's still an open question for us. But we did our utmost to make this system of indicators suitable for the local level as well. I mean, both sectoral and local indicators. We believe that in the process of practical application, we will be able to collect more evidence on its actionability. And in the next presentation, you will hear more on the visualization of the key 120 indicators that we included into our system. Marfa, we cannot hear you. Marfa, are you here? It looks like we've lost Marfa. While she's trying to reconnect, we will transition to the next presentation by Ms. Inna Schwab. She's the project monitoring, evaluation, and reporting advisor of the project Women in Ukraine, Heard, Capable, Resilient, implemented by PACT Ukraine. Inna, are you here? Yes, I'm here. So the title of your presentation is How to Visualize and Store Gender Data to Better Monitor Gender Equality Between Women and Men. And as far as I understand, you will present the gender data portal of the PACT Ukraine project. You have 10 minutes for your presentation. All right, thank you. Do I have the screen sharing rights? Yes, I do. Just a minute. Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you very much for the invitation to this important and stimulating event. Today, I would like to expose you to our collective experience together with the Kyiv Institute of Gender Studies. Some other colleagues were also engaged in the development of the concept for the online portal of strategic information on gender equality. So what is the purpose behind this portal? We did this within the project Women of Ukraine, Heard, Capable, and Resilient. So why did we decide to create this online portal of information on gender equality? I think that we all agree that there is a shortage of gender data in Ukraine, and we faced another challenge. We were not able to find additional data for our activities. The project participated in the Canadian Embassy in Ukraine project, and we tried to find some data on the current state of play with regard to gender equality or inequality in Ukraine. The data were there, but they were random, sporadic, and scattered. The data was not visualized, and hence the idea of our project. We decided to create an online portal accessible to various target groups, and this online portal encapsulates all strategic data that can be used for planning, advocacy campaigns, and decision-making at national and regional levels in Ukraine.
Такого порталу ми ставили собі покращити доступність даних з питань гендерної рівності в
So
Україні.
we decided to aim to enhance the accessibility of the data on gender equality of Ukraine so that they would be in one place presented in a friendly way. Usually the data is presented and collected in Excel format, but those who are not very friendly with the numbers would find it difficult to understand what the spreadsheet contains and how they find the number they need to advocate the changes at whatever level. So we decided that it's important to present the data in a friendly format that would be easy for use and interpretation, and that they would be nicely visually presented. We know that a lot of experts have difficulty working with the software, with Excel, and other visualization tools. So we decided to offer something ready for use. Like there's a diagram, you can download it and use it for your presentation or some campaign aimed to change the situation. So what steps have been made to implement the idea? Well, we set up the working group to develop the online portal for strategic information within the national platform, Equal Rights and Opportunity, with the Governmental Commissioner for Gender Policy. We're very grateful for the support, and we are joined by the representatives of many governmental and non-governmental organizations. Our working group comprises a representative of the state statistics, research institutions, and experts in gender field. Next, we needed to identify the visualization frameworks for the data on the portal. There are many available, and we had a discussion, and we decided that we would check the title sections from the CEDAW, but the portal would incorporate all the indicators included in the Beijing Action Platform and Sustainable Development Goals. The next step was to identify the list of indicators for visualization. At first, it was 126. Now there are 74 indicators that are supported with data that we are going to visualize. And the next 3 points that we are working on are collection of data for the indicators, developing indicator profiles, which indicate the content of the indicators. We hope that the portal is going to be a sustainable and living tool, is going to be supported and administered. And we know that whoever becomes the next holder of the portal would need the indicator profiles to do the job. We are almost finished with this assignment. We are now developing the structure of the portal and developing the approaches to visualization of data. The next steps that we plan to take short term are the testing of the technical side of the portal. Before we can upload the indicators in open access, we'll do the feedback form so that people can provide their comments about the improvement of visualization, improvement of the portal, and a longer term goal would be the developing the strategy for portal sustainability. We're going to think who can hold and support the portal, how do we ensure sustainability? That's something we need to consider next. Now, we have having the premiere, the presentation of the portal. This is the very first visualization attempt developed, and we just want to use of the opportunity to present it to a wider audience, to show you what we're planning to do and how it's going to look. So far, there are 14 sections. Let me click them. No, it's not working like this. If you could give me a second while I load the portal. So each tab is going to have a set of indicators. There are 74 so far, and still there's much more to be done. We thought we had collected all the data, but when we started looking at the visualization, we realized that we need to present them, disaggregate them differently. Still a lot needs to be done, but we can already share the first results with you. To give you one indicator as example, the share of men and women who had received the status of an internally displaced person. The portal is working interactively. You can set the period. The data is available from 2017 to 2021. You can choose the data by year. You can choose the data for the entire period. You can see the share, you can see the numbers, the gender, age, look, type of area, social status, and other data. And as I was saying, we have 74 such indicators. We're going to be developing the visualization for each indicator presented in each section. And we are planning to have a number of meetings of the working group on the strategic information portal for gender equality to work through the visualization and visualization approaches for each indicators to make it a useful resource that will be actively used by the subject matter experts for their purposes and their needs. So that's all that I had for you, and I'll be very happy to take any questions. Thank you, Ina. I hope you'll share the presentation with us, and we hope you'll share the link to the resource if someone hasn't followed you. I cannot share the link so far as the resource is still raw, it's still in the making, and we don't want to discourage the people from using it. We don't want to disappoint you. We'll launch the portal when it's finished, when we can be certain that it's working right, so that is useful for the people, so that it doesn't discourage the people from using the resource. Thank you. So this was one of the key questions we had for you. We are very much looking forward to the presentation and to the portal. We have just 5 minutes remaining to the end of the meeting. We'll have Victoria send to all the registered participants a link to the Google document, which will present the recommendations and proposals to be included in the resolution that you can comment, amend, add on. And we have time to do that by the end of tomorrow. Victoria will send it out to you by the end of today. And we have a few questions, and any keynote speakers are free to take them. I'll read out the questions first. So the question number one, whether the monitoring for the rights of women will include the rights of women with disability, as they are those suffering from multiple forms of discrimination. The next question, how are we going to consider the assessment of the criteria, and how do they speak of the equality or inequality? And how do we apply CEDAW indicators at community level? So we have three questions. Would anyone like to take them? If I could answer the third question, please. You're welcome.
Щодо осіб з інвалідністю відкоментують, я не хочу відповідати сама на всі питання.
I
Ще хтось мав таку можливість.
don't want to answer all the questions.
СІДО на рівні громади.
And as for CEDAW at community level,
На даний момент ми були зосереджені на
currently
тому, і це основний об'єм виконаної нами роботи.
we
Зробити адекватні
dedicated our efforts to developing comprehensive indicators for the national reporting, as Ukraine will be reporting to the committee, and we needed to have a block of reliable indicators. And we rushed this package of indicators to make it for the reporting deadline. And we developed pretty good indicators for these sectors.
Прошу вимкнути, просимо вимкнути мікрофон.
На 11 місяців закладений.
Будь ласка, разом онлайн. Дякуємо. Тобто ми дуже багато зусиль доклали,
So we
щоб
dedicated a lot of effort to developing the sectoral tools, the sub-indicators. We are aware of the initiatives you are mentioning, CEDAW indicators at community level, and they work in the communities, in the countries that haven't signed the convention. So there is the all-American initiative, as the United States have not exceeded the convention, and they have bottom-up initiatives for the convention, and they are called CEDAW for the cities. And their indicators are adapted to community level. But I'll be honest, before you, we haven't gone that far. This is our next objective.
на інші питання колеги нададуть відповідь, може?
Would my colleagues like to answer other questions? Thank you, Marfa. We have two more questions outstanding, whether monitoring of the rights of women includes the rights of women with disability, and what are the criteria for assessment of the indicators and their inclusion in the overall assessment. Would anyone else like to speak out? I'd be happy to take the questions if no one else is volunteering.
У нас дуже хороша співпраця з
So we have very well established cooperation with the colleagues working with women with disability. We have a strong and reliable partnership. We integrated the indicators they developed under the Convention for People with Disability into our system to the greatest possible extent.
думаю, що це відповідь на питання.
And I think that answers the question. As for the second question, I'm not entirely clear about what the question is about. The question was, how do we assess the indicators and how do they contribute to the overall assessment?
Насправді це ключове питання вимірювання.
That's a key matter of measuring.
Ну, ми опиралися на наші
We relied
просто вже дуже давно, понад
on our expertise, more than 20-year expertise, and we've been a monitoring organization for at least a decade. So we relied on the indicators submitted by our national institutions, both governmental and non-governmental, and we contrasted them with the information of focus group discussions, consultations, meetings with vulnerable groups reporting that their situation isn't reflected. So we try to include the structural indicators and discrimination reported by different groups or their representatives or some individuals. If a group is very vulnerable, it usually cannot speak out. There's nobody to speak out about the problems. You won't hear it. You have to take a lot of effort to hear the voices of the discriminated, marginalized groups that don't have a representation. We try to do it to the greatest possible extent and to be using public consultations as a tool. We always talk through the ideas with the society as we did so today by forcing you to engage with us to discuss very technical issues to do with the gender instruments. It's a difficult discussion, but we're very grateful for your contribution. If I may add a comment about the indicators, I was saying that we thought up our own indicators that we used for the survey last year. Indeed, they build a national picture as when we now find ourselves in a position to compare that in 2005, there were only a handful of communities who could talk about the gender equality, like Zhytomyr city, which had its gender passport, and a few others. Unlike now, based on the indicators we have listed, and we see many of them included in the gender passports presented by the UN Women Project. Owing to these indicators, we can further trace the progress in the implementation of the gender equality policy at the local level. So if we take the gender disaggregated data for statistics and admin services, it's one thing, but if we look at the number of gender passports developed for the territorial communities, the number of groups of equal opportunities, number of communities that have signed the European Charter of Equality for men and women, and others that we launched last year, we can continue tracing the evolution of gender policy in our communities. And that is very helpful at the national level, as we've learned afterwards, having presented the information that many donor organizations have responded very positively as it helps them plan their interventions for the future, plan their project, and see which areas need support with technical assistance or any other assistance like the awareness raising or whatever. Thank you. Thank you, Natalia. Thank you, Marfa. We've used up the time given to us. We've run over the time limit. Please send any other questions you may have directly to the Kyiv Institute of Gender Studies. You will receive the email in the Google Docs, the same document as the resolution of the meeting. And to conclude the event, I'd like to give the floor for the final word to the representative of PACT Ukraine, Oksana Zhizhvata Inna Schwab, and afterwards we'll have two more final remarks, and that will be the end of today. So, Oksana and Inna, the floor is yours.
Можна, поки вони підключаються, я хочу привітати всіх. Прекрасна подія, прекрасна
While they are connecting, I would like to greet everyone. An extremely stimulating and insightful event, and all the presentations were instructive. So I just wanted to express my gratitude to Oksana. Inna, are you here? It looks like the colleagues had to leave our meeting. Inna, the floor is yours. I'm here. Well, I just didn't really pay attention to the fact that my mic was muted. Oksana, are you here? Apparently not. Dear colleagues, I guess Oksana wanted to make a closing speech. Most likely she encountered some technical issues. Anyway, colleagues, thank you very much for your contribution to this initiative. I'm sure that without cooperation with the Kyiv Institute of Gender Studies, we would not have been able to achieve the same progress with this gender data online portal, because we used their achievements and accomplishments as a basis for the online portal that we really hope will be presented to the general public shortly. So we are very grateful for being engaged in this endeavor. Our product is still raw. It's not 100% ready yet, but we are still pleased to be part and parcel of this great community of people and contribute to developing a system of monitoring women's rights and gender equality. So thank you very much for your understanding, for your support and cooperation. Let's stay in touch and continue working together on the development of this monitoring system. Thank you, Inna. Now I want to give the floor to the representative of the Swiss Cooperation Office in Ukraine, Ms. Lyudmila Nastreляй, for closing remarks, and also Ms. Marta Skorek, the director of the Kyiv Institute of Gender Studies. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. It's a great pleasure for me to have the opportunity to say a couple of words. I'm really impressed by the scale and scope of our today's project. As mentioned by Marfa, the project was a formidable task, but nonetheless, we can see that there's a great need for the project in its activities. We are really pleased that our partners from the Kyiv Institute of Gender Studies are expanding their activities, and we are really delighted to see that they have a large group of like-minded people by their side. And we need to not only craft this tool, but also make it actionable. I really hope that we will have more tools like that in our country, because we want our country and our society to be a more fair and democratic place that will take into account the rights and needs of diverse groups of population, be it gender groups or sex-based groups, and we also need to factor in the needs of other groups. We should not leave anyone behind. It's an important principle behind all our programs and activities. So once again, a big thank you to all the participants and contributors. I want to wish all of us even more successes on this pathway. Thank you, Lyudmila. Marfa, the floor is yours. Thank you for this opportunity to articulate some closing remarks. This event would not be possible without the support of our like-minded partners from the Swiss Cooperation Office. And I also want to express my gratitude to the colleagues from the Association of Ukrainian Cities and PACT Ukraine and the Gender Budgeting Bureau. They agreed to cooperate with us, and they contributed significantly to this basket of findings. and accomplishments. We really hope that our work will be beneficial and that we will be able to translate all our ideas and plans into reality. On my part, I also want to extend my words of gratitude to all the participants, to all the contributors and speakers, the Kyiv Institute of Gender Studies, the Swiss Cooperation Office in Ukraine, and also all those international organizations that continue supporting women's rights and gender equality in Ukraine. At this, I announce our event officially closed. And I want to remind you that you will receive a Google document to submit your proposals for the resolution. You have time to do that by the day of after tomorrow, and then this resolution will be disseminated to all the stakeholders. That's it for now. We really hope that this is not the last meeting of this kind on this topic. Thank you, everyone, once again.